Okay, great. So, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Erin Farley, and I am one of JRSA's research associates. And for those of you who may be less familiar with JRSA, it stands for the Justice, Research, and Statistics Association. And we are a national nonprofit organization that's dedicated to the use of research and analysis to inform criminal and juvenile justice decision-making. And we are comprised of a network of researchers and practitioners, which at the core include directors and staff from the state statistical analysis centers. So before I go any further, I want to thank our partners at the Bureau of Justice Statistics for helping to make this webinar possible. And it is my pleasure today to welcome you to our webinar titled An Introduction to the National Crime Victimization Survey. And today's webinar is going to be presented by 3 statisticians from the Victimization Statistics Unit at BJS. And so I'd like to introduce Erica Harrell. She works mostly with the National Crime Victimization Survey, and during her time at BJS, she's written on a variety of topics using NCVS data, including identity theft, workplace violence, crime against persons with disabilities, and household poverty. Second, I'd like to introduce Grace Keena, and her areas of focus include national and subnational crime victimization trends, methodological work and planning for the National Crime Victimization Survey, child and youth well-being, and education. And finally, I'd like to introduce Jennifer Truman, and her current research interests and work focus on victimization patterns and trends, stalking victimization, family violence, firearm violence, and the measurement of demographic characteristics using the National Crime Victimization Survey. So I would really like to welcome Jennifer, Grace, and Erica, and I will step out of the way and let you guys take over. So welcome.
Well, thank you, Erin. Good afternoon. My name is Erica Harrell. I'm a statistician with BJS, and first we would like to thank JRSA, Erin, and Jason for allowing us to give this presentation on the NCVS and putting out their information about the data that we work with daily. Get started. Okay, going to the history and background of the NCVS. The emphasis and original goals of the NCVS basically can be traced back to the late 60s. President Johnson's Commission on Law Enforcement and the Administration of Justice called for the development of a nationwide crime victimization survey. And the goals were basically to get information that we couldn't get from the UCR. That is, measuring that dark figure of crime that's not reported to the police, and also to look at police reporting in the population, and also to get measures of indicators that you just basically can't get by just looking at police reports. So in 1972, the National Crime Survey was fielded by the Law Enforcement Assistance Administration, LEAA, and the U.S. Census Bureau. Now, the NCVS, the V was added back in 1992, renamed the National Crime Victimization Survey, and is currently being administered by the Bureau of Justice Statistics, BJS. Currently, we are prepping for another redesign. We had one back in 92. We're prepping for another redesign of the NCVS. Now, the NCVS presents a complementary set of crimes as the UCR with some differences. We measure the same subset of crimes in terms of rape, robbery, aggravated assault, burglary, theft, motor vehicle theft. But how some of these crimes are defined do differ between the NCVS and the UCR. And we do have a publication there that kind of lays out a lot of those differences. Now, the NCVS provides data on characteristics of victims and crimes for the U.S. and the population and subgroups. And actually, we're the only national source of data on a lot of topics such as intimate partner violence, crimes against persons with disabilities, firearms and crime, cost of crime, and reporting to police. The NCVS does get a good amount of coverage with the national media, as you can see on this slide with the web articles from Fox News, NPR, Consumer Reports. We've been reported on in the Washington Post, CNN, all the major networks, news outlets. They do cover this National Crime Victimization Survey. Now, looking at the methodology of the NCVS, sample design and selection. Now, the target population of the NCVS are persons age 12 and over living in household units and in group quarters. Now, those household units do exclude people who are homeless, and when we talk about group quarters, we're actually talking about non-institutionalized group quarters, so people such as prisoners are not included. And I'll get to that on a later slide. The NCVS is a panel survey. The household is contacted once every 6 months for a total of 7 interviews. Addresses remain in the household for 3.5 years, and interviews are actually conducted continuously throughout the year. It's not all the interviews are conducted on one day. All the interviews are kind of spread out during the month, and the interview is continuously going on and on every day. Since we do have a panel design, there are a lot of benefits to that. It's more cost efficient. We do have smaller variances for estimates of year-to-year change. And thanks to the 7 ways that one address, we can examine basically within person and within household change over time. And also we have our ways allow us to have bounding, especially after the first interview. What we do with the first interview, we do ask about crimes, and then we kind of bound them for ways 2 through 7 in later interviews. So we make sure that crimes that were previously reported are not reported again. Now, before 2006, the initial interviews were excluded from estimates, but since 2006, those initial interviews are included in our data, but we have a weighting adjustment applied to sort of handle those unbounded interviews. 2016 sample redesign. The NCVS sample is redesigned every 10 years to reflect the results of the most recent decennial census. In 2016, it was redesigned to do a bit more than just reflect the current U.S. population. We also wanted to, it was also increased to explore the possibility of using the sample to produce state and local level estimates. Actually using up to 3 years of data, we wanted to produce coefficients of variation of no more than 10% for state level estimates. Currently, the national sample is designed to produce annual estimates for the whole population with a CV of no more than 5%. Now, sample coverage. Looking at who's included, like I stated before, it's housing units and non-institutionalized group quarters. Persons who are included are household respondents who give information about the entire household on property crimes, and individual respondents who talk about personal crimes, including violent crimes. We do have proxy respondents, and we do have requirements for those proxy respondents, including parents who don't want their 12 or 13-year-olds to be interviewed. A household member is temporarily absent and won't return to the household before the interview is closed out. It's usually by the end of the month. And also, if a household member is physically or mentally incapacitated during the entire interview period, that is during the 6 months prior to that interview, and their problems make it such that it's impossible for that person to be interviewed. In those 3 scenarios, we do allow proxy interviews. Units and persons that are excluded from the NCVS, people under 12, and like I said, those institutionalized group quarters, which includes the military barracks, institutionalized persons, people who are incarcerated. We also exclude the homeless because by design it's meant to be a household survey. U.S. citizens serving abroad in certain group quarters, such as hospice facilities, are also excluded by design from the NCVS. Our sample size, from our most recent data, our household data file, we have for 2017 over 145,000 household interviews. We had a response rate of 76%. And people, in 2017, we had almost 240,000 eligible persons, ages 12 and older, with a response rate of 84%. The interview mode. Usually, for a household, the first interview is conducted in person, with interview 2 through 7 being conducted by phone, meaning that most NCVS interviews are attempted by phone. So even though some of these still may turn into in-person interviews if a person prefers actually a face-to-face, if the respondent prefers a face-to-face conversation. But they are conducted in person for other reasons as well, or if they don't have a telephone, if they don't want to be interviewed by telephone, or if their telephone has a privacy detector that requires the caller to enter a PIN, that household can actually have an in-person interview. And generally, about half of interviews are conducted in person each year. Now, talking about our data quality, we have several measures that measure the quality of the data that we get from the NCVS. The non-response follow-up, in some cases in which a household refused to participate, the supervisory interviewer would follow up with the household to try to convince them to participate in the NCVS. We have the Census Bureau, which provides our interviewers. They have conversion specialists to go out. We also do re-interviews in which a supervisory interviewer would re-interview a certain portion of respondents to confirm that the information that they reported was actually correct. That's during interviewing, that's during data collection. Now, after data collection, we also have other measures that we use, non-response bias analysis. If response, now for the Census Bureau surveys, if the response rate goes below a certain percentage, the Census Bureau does do a non-response bias study. Source and accuracy statement, that is something that we're beginning to release to the public every year with our data. It explains the NCVS sample design, estimation methods, quality measures, and things such as how we calculate standard errors and variances of our estimates using the NCVS data. And also it talks about the coverage that we have for certain demographic groups in our data. And you can find more information about this in our technical documentation, which you can get to from that link in that slide. And now I want to turn it over to Jennifer to talk about our survey instrument.
Thank you, Erica. Good afternoon, everyone. So as Erica mentioned, I'm going to talk about the way the NCVS instrument is designed. So there are 3 basic instruments that belong in the NCVS. So there's the control card, which gets us at the household roster and allows us to identify household respondents. There's the basic screen questionnaire, or the NCVS-1, and this is our screening instrument where we ask about victimization experiences. And then if a respondent has experienced victimization, we then collect a crime incident report, or the NCVS-2. In addition, we have supplements, periodic supplements. Right now in the field, we're collecting stalking data. Next year, we'll be collecting identity theft data. So we have periodic supplements, and those are collected every 6-month time period. Just to give you an idea, and I kind of just already talked through this, so when we get into the household, we start with a roster. And from there, once we identify household respondents, each of the household respondents would receive the screening instrument, asking them about any victimization experiences they have. If they were, in fact, identified as a victim, then they will receive a crime incident report. And if they were not a victim, then they'll go straight into the demographic questions that were added in July of 2016. And these demographic questions included things like veteran status and citizenship. If they were a victim, they'll receive the crime incident reports for the incidents they reported, and then they'll go into the demographic questions. And then at the end of that, if there's a supplement in the field, so as I mentioned, identity theft, stalking, school crime, police public contact, and fraud, they will receive that after as well. So the control card that we use is essentially a record to have identify the sampling unit, to locate and confirm that there are in fact persons in the household, and we identify the field representatives, the interviewers that go out, identify the household respondent, and it's generally the most knowledgeable adult in the household that can answer questions about every other household member. And it's used to obtain demographic information about each person in the household as well as information about the household at large. So here's just an example of some of the questions. So asking about the quarters themselves, so whether or not they're living in student housing, if the building is owned by public, if it's public housing. There's other, we ask about the sex, the race, Hispanic origin, age of all the persons in the household, as well as relationships between to the household respondent. So if it's, say, the husband of the household, then we would collect information about his or her, their partner, as well as any of their children in the household as well. So after we identify the household members, each person that's 12 or older, so the roster actually allows us to identify persons that are under the age of 12, and we do that so that if someone, when we start the interview, because as Erica pointed out, the interview is, or the NCVS is a panel interview, so somebody can actually age into the survey. So if a child in the household was 11 when we started the survey and they turned 12, then they would get they would actually get this screening questionnaire the next time we were in the household. So that allows us to do that as well. So everyone 12 or older in the household receives the basic screen questionnaire. This allows us to screen and ask respondents whether or not they've experienced any crimes. It's designed to look at whether or not the households experienced anything as a whole, so that would be property crime, and the household respondent reports those. And then each individual person answers about personal crime. So this includes things like sexual assault, robbery, assault, as well as personal theft. The questions are designed in a short Q format, and the STEM is really asking about what the respondent has experienced and then giving examples of things they might have experienced. So we're not using crime terms. We're not asking if the person was a victim of robbery or of theft even. We're asking them specific screeners. So here's an example asking about vehicle theft. So, assuming the household had a vehicle, was that vehicle stolen or used without permission? Did anyone steal any cars? So it's kind of cueing them on things that might have happened. And so we ask this of all respondents. Again, this is just an example. Grace will point you to the larger website that has the instruments on it if you're interested in looking at those later. But again, we're not asking them, were you a victim of robbery? We're asking them, if something was stolen, if someone attacked them, and cueing them into things that might have happened to them. If the person did identify that they had been a victim, we would then ask them the crime incident report, which gathers information about the crimes that they reported. So they complete one crime incident report for each incident that's reported in the screener, the NCVS one. And it's all incident-based, and so the questions are focused on the incident and asking about the incident. And the crime, when you see our reports, and I'll go through kind of the crime classification here in a second, but when you see our reports, the estimates that we're producing are coming from the crime incident report and not the screener. So the screener actually allows persons to get into the crime incident report, and then we're actually collecting these details to determine the type of crimes that respondents have experienced using this form. So this incident report asks things about location and presence of the incident, whether there was an attack that happened, if they were threatened, injured, different consequences, including emotional consequences, offender information, including, you know, the offender characteristics if the respondent knew anything about the offender. We also gather information to determine if it was a completed crime or an attempted crime, and if there was any property damage, information about how much damage, the cost of that, and then, of course, to allow us to get at that dark figure, whether or not they were reported to the police. And this is, again, just an example of a piece of the instrument. So this asks kind of location, so if in what city, town did this occur, and this also allows us to classify incidents that happen outside of the U.S. They're pretty rare, but if they did happen outside of the U.S., we wouldn't count them because we're reporting on victimization in the United States. And then we specify, what state and county. But again, this is just an example that we threw up there for you to see kind of what it looks like on the screen. In addition, we look at and classify serious crimes. So serious crimes are victimizations that are similar in nature, but are so frequent that the victim is unable to recall enough detail to describe. So something like intimate partner violence or, bullying or repeated attacks, those things would fall into here. And so because the respondent had said that this happens so frequently, and they can't recall enough detail, we just collect information about the most recent incident. In addition, at the end of the NCVS 2 or the crime incident report, we ask the respondent to summarize the incident. And this actually helps us to do editing and coding. So the Census Bureau does our data collection and does our editing and coding. And they're comparing the narrative information to the information that's collected in the instrument and just making sure that things are classifying correctly. So a big thing is paying attention to presence, whether or not the respondent was present during, during the event. If there were attacks, the location. So if something might have got keyed wrong, they are able to do some editing to pick up that information with the summary as well. And then all of this detail, again, as I mentioned, allows us to be able to classify crimes. So kind of looking at an overview of the crimes that we are able to classify. So if anyone's looked at our reports, we tend to report on the larger categories, but the detail that we collect in the crime incident report allows us to get at all this information. So we have overall violent crimes, our kind of big categories, so violent crime, rape, sexual assault, robbery, aggravated assault and simple assault, as well as the personal stuff, the purse snatching, pocket picking. But we can get at whether or not these things were completed, whether they were attempted, if there was weapons involved. So all that information is collected in the CIR, the crime incident report. At the property crime level, we collect and can classify burglary, motor vehicle theft, and other theft. And again, the details, so whether it was completed, for burglary, if there was forcible entry, and then the theft, we can look at the amount of theft that they experienced. I briefly mentioned a little bit ago that we also have supplements, and really the supplements were designed to be able to let the NCVS look at other crimes that may not be traditionally able to measure in this kind of screener and CIR format. Excuse me. They look at things like identity theft, police public contact, school crime. So again, we do these on a periodic basis. School crime is every couple years, identity theft as well. Stalking we've done in 2016, and we're, as I mentioned, in the field right now in 2019. Police public contact is about every 3 years. So we try, and fraud was new in 17. So we try to collect them periodically, which I realize is on my next slide. They're typically, again, because we collect data on, we're always in the field collecting data, but we do it in 6-month periods because we're asking the respondents about prior victimization in their 6 months during the NCVS core interview. And so our supplements then run every 6 months in the field, so January through June or July through December. And again, they have to have completed, the respondents had to have completed the NCVS interview before proceeding to the supplements. So that does, unfortunately, in some cases, decrease our response rate. So if they didn't, if they didn't respond to the NCVS, then we're not going to get them as a respondent to our supplements. All of the supplements have a reference period, though, of 12 months because they're not collected as frequently. And generally, the estimates, instead of being victimization and incident-based or prevalence-based. So that's one thing to keep in mind. Grace is going to talk about the larger NCVS, but for the NCVS supplements, the data when they're released are released at the National Archive of Criminal Justice Data. They are a flat file, and because they are, again, the prevalence measures, and most of them do have the core NCVS variables attached, so you can look at the crime experiences. There are larger crime experiences as well as connected to something like identity theft or stalking. Erica had mentioned the technical document that has information about how we calculate standard errors and indirect variance estimation. All of the supplements have their own generalized variance functions, and you can also do direct estimation with them as well. And so that information is, within the code books. Just as a schedule, as I mentioned, we're in the field with the supplemental victimization supplement, which is looking at stalking victimization. And then as of January next year, we will be in the field with identity theft as well. So now I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Grace Kina to talk about how you can access our data.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks again for joining us today. So just to talk a little bit about how to actually access the data, Erica and Jenna have covered what the history of the data are and sort of what the data represent and how we collect it. And so I just want to go over the different things that we have available. There are a couple of different options for people who want to use the data for their own analysis or just want to learn more about this survey generally. So the main source of information is found on the BJS website on the NCVS page. So there you can find general descriptions of the NCVS, including some of the things that we've talked about today, as well as for the specific supplements. You can find information about the data and the code book and more details about the survey methodology and technical documentation, as well as key terms and definitions so that there's a clear understanding about what we mean and what we're including, for example, when we talk about robbery or when we talk about aggravated assault. So all of that information is on the website. The website also links to the National Archive of Criminal Justice Data, which Jenna mentioned a short time ago, and I'll come back to that in a moment. On the website, we're not looking at it now, but on the website, one thing I wanted to point out is if you look on the far left side of the page, there's a little link for victims. If you click on that or hover on it, you'll find a drop-down menu with other items related to victimization that might be of interest. So turning to the public use data, we have a set of data that are available to anyone who wants it and can be downloaded by going to this website. On that website, again, you'll find more general information about the NCVS and how it's collected, how to use it, the actual data files are also available for the core NCVS as well as for each of the individual supplements. So with the core NCVS data, we have both single-year data files and concatenated data files, which are sort of a linked set of data for years over time. So we generally recommend referencing the most recent data year just to make sure that you're looking at the most up-to-date set of files, because variables change over time and that sort of thing. So that's just something to keep in mind if you want to access the data in that way. Another thing that we wanted to point out was the resource guide on this website is a very helpful tool that walks users through how to replicate NCVS estimates the way that we do it at BJS using these public use files. And then also available on this website is a list of publications that use the NCVS, including those with authors that are external to BJS. So the next two sets of data platforms, the NCVS API and NVAT, as we call it, offer users a subset of core NCVS data to work with, starting with the 1993 data. So the API is available for developers to use and features population data and data for crimes against persons and households. It also has information on a selection of personal and household demographic characteristics. So these get into some of the things that Jenna was talking through about the data we collect and how different characteristics can be compared in terms of persons or households who experience crimes and their personal characteristics. The API is available in a couple of formats, including XML, and is updated annually as new data years are released. The NCVS Victimization Analysis Tool, or the NVAT, like the API, includes a subset, although a substantive subset of the core NCVS data, and it allows users to examine data on both violent and property crimes by a selection of victim, household, and crime characteristics. So users can generate estimates using preset quick tables, as well as custom tables that use a more expansive set of variables. You can generate data on counts. An example of that would be the total number of persons who experienced any kind of property crime in 2010 rates, such as the rate per 1,000 persons who experienced a robbery from 1993 through 2017, and percentages. An example of that would be the percentage of persons who reported a motor vehicle theft in 2015. On the NVAT homepage, on the tab on the far right, I just want to point out the supporting documents link, which includes a number of helpful things, including a very detailed user's guide that walks people through how to use the tool and features important information such as how to interpret the results. So we highly commend that as a resource. We also have restricted use data, which contains more geographically identified variables, more detailed information on where the respondents are located, for example, and for privacy reasons and things like that. Those data require a proposal process. They're not just readily available to anyone. So information about that is available on the website on the slide, and that data includes both data for the core NCVS as well as supplements. So our contact information is above, and that concludes the formal part of the presentation, and we'd like to welcome any questions if anyone has any.
Great, thank you. Yeah, we'll take a couple minutes, and if anyone has questions, just type them into the chat feature, using the chat feature, and we'll see if any pop up. And in the meantime, we'll launch the poll.
while the poll is up, we also wanted to walk through how to use the NVAT, if that would be useful to people.
Sorry, I think I was on mute. Yeah, that sounds like a great idea if you want to go ahead and do that. We still have about 18 minutes left, so that sounds like a great idea.
Okay, great. We're pulling it up. Oh.
So I think maybe, let's see, Jason might have to give you back the magic globe to be able to do that. Let's see. See if I can, yeah, I can't grab it.
Aaron, when the poll's open, you can't switch participant.
Oh, okay. Okay. Is it easily accessible if you had a link and put it in the chat feature? Jason could open it up real quickly.
Yeah, it's in the links and the
Oh, okay.
slides in the presentation.
Okay, which is it the slide
34.
Oh, 34?
34.
Okay. Jason, do you mind grabbing that?
Hang on, let me get to that.
Awesome.
Yeah, I guess our numbers are a little different. One more, I think, two more. 3. Yep, there we go. So if you could just click on that link.
Just a second here. I have to open up a web browser for this.
Okay, thank you. So it's maybe a little bit hard to see, but just pointing to some of the things that we talked about. If you could go to the quick tables. So this is just a list of preset options that we have that people could generate estimates for. So for example, if we go to violent victimization for 2013 through 17, that gives you a table that pulls those estimates together. So with that, we also have measures of error, including the standard error here. We have numbers, rates, and percent, as we talked about as well. So yeah, so the standard error for the numbers, we can go to that. Oh, technical difficulties, inconveniently. So, anyhow, all right, looks like we're back.
I'll try it one more time here.
Okay. Okay. Right, so these are the errors for the rates, but just to give an idea of how to use this and what's available. You can close out of that and go to the custom table. So let's go to household victimization. Yep, select type. So again, here you can select your years, you can select your victimization type, and you can compare a cross-tab of 2 variables. So let's, yeah, thank you, Jason. Let's do location of residence. then reporting to police. So here we have these data broken out across these two categories by year. So we have persons in households that experienced, or households rather that experienced different types of, or actually burglary altogether, and looking at that across urbanicity, location of residence, whether it was an urban, suburban, or rural area over time, and whether these crimes were reported to the police. So these data basically reflect what's collected in the survey. And again, here we have the numbers, the rates, and the percentages, as well as the standard errors that go with those estimates at the top there. You can print these reports and save them as well. Yep, there we go. So we can close out of this. The methodology test gives just, some more general description about the NCVS, some of the things that we've talked about, and things to keep in mind as we use the tool. Going back to the top, the terms and definitions includes the definitions of the specific terms that we're using and how we're defining them according to the data that we collect. Under supporting documents, we have, as I mentioned, an overview of the NCVS. We have links to the questionnaires, the publications that BJS has released using NCVS data, as well as the population counts, which are useful as well, just if you need those for calculations that you're making. The user's guide is one thing I wanted to point to. So as I mentioned, this is a comprehensive guide for people who are interested in using the tool that has a lot of useful information. So please use it in that. Consulting is helpful. Okay, I think that is all we have, unless there are further questions.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I don't see any additional questions in the chat feature, but this is an amazing tool. So I have to admit, I didn't know this existed. So I'm very excited to be able to go through here and see all the features. So this is really amazing. Great resource. I just thought while we're wrapping up, is there any work that the three of you are doing that you wanted to highlight to everyone on the has attended the webinar, or will you be attending any upcoming conferences and presenting any of your work? Anything you might want to spotlight?
Yes. Yeah, we're actually, all of us are attending the ASC, American Society of Criminology, in November. It's in San Francisco this year, and we'll be presenting. We have an NCVS users group panel that we do every year, so we'll be presenting that. And in fact, we have started to do a workshop the day before the conference starts. So the Tuesday we do an afternoon workshop kind of covering essentially what we've covered here, but more extensively. And we've tried to allow time for folks to analyze the data and ask questions while we're there. So that's 1 to 5 the Tuesday before. I'm pretty sure we still have spots. If anyone on this webinar is interested and is planning to attend ASC, we'll be there doing that as well. We should have the 2018 report out in the next couple months or so, and then the redesign, the larger redesign of the NCVS instrument is kind of the next big thing coming for us, other than regular reports that we release.
Oh, great. Oh, it looks like we do have 2 questions. One is, well, maybe a two-parter question for one person and then another one. It's, what does the proposal process look like for the geographical data? We are a state agency. Would we be able to see statistics specific to our state?
It depends on your state. To respond to the second part of the question, the way the sample is designed or was redesigned in 2016, it was to allow for reliable estimates over the period of 3 years is what we were estimating, since we've never done this before, for the 22 largest states. And so if you are one of the 22 largest, chances are there will be data available at some point. Otherwise, the sample may not be distributed across your state so as to allow for representative estimates, so it sort of depends. And the proposal process is outlined at that website that we pointed to, but we're happy to answer any questions offline if that would be helpful.
Great.
Great speaking.
Okay, so we have one more question. It says, an earlier slide mentioned state-level estimates. Is there a user-friendly way to get state-level estimates across multiple crimes and years by race, gender of victims and offenders? And then it says, I've only used NCVS for national-level estimates. Would the restricted geographical data get any of this?
It would at some point. We're still sort of, as I mentioned, this is a sort of preliminary effort for BJS to collect these data for the NCVS, including these 22 largest states. The sample was such that certain very large states have always or have mostly had representative data, but that hasn't been true across the board. So that was the purpose of the sample redesign, to be able to get that data at the state level, at least the sort of larger estimates. For smaller subcategories, we may not be at the point yet to be able to report out on those things. But again, the proposal process is outlined, and we're happy to answer any other more detailed questions offline. Welcome.
Okay, great. Well, thank you again for taking the time to present and support JRSA's webinar series. So we'll definitely keep an eye out for you all at ASC, and I want to thank everyone for attending today. And just as a reminder, there will be a link to this webinar and a copy of the PowerPoint slides available on our website under resources, and then we have webinars. So keep an eye out for that. And I think you had left your email addresses available to everyone. If they have any follow-up questions, they can reach you there. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you.
Great. Take care, everybody. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you. Thank you.